Okay, welcome to episode 12 of Building Site. This is the real coding episode, not the one I just did. And we shall... today Jeremy's not here, so we're going to have Tim Green with us, but Tim couldn't join us because he has a customer demo. So in fact, I'm going to be on my own, and there's a few things that I want to do on site that I feel would be improvements. So just wait for... Okay.
Sorry to interrupt, Malcolm.
Oh no, I just
hopefully you can
yeah.
edit this out. Are you broadcasting the video somewhere?
I'm streaming at the moment, and I'm recording, which is that's why I invited you to. Well, I mean, nobody's in the stream, so nobody's watching that. But you can.
Is the video stream is on Twitch?
It's Twitch/Malcolm Sparks,
Okay.
so you can sort of watch it, but there is a bit of a latency. Or
No, that's
I
fair.
can. Yeah, there's another way I can do this, which is to. This is what we do. We export. I can do this via Discord. So you stay on Discord. I just need to remember how to do this.
I think Twitch is okay actually. I'll just watch on Twitch and listen here, or I can deafen here and listen on Twitch.
Okay.
Both work.
Either or. I'm gonna just broadcast this anyway, so you can have a look at the. Can you see that on Discord on the stream?
Yep.
Okay, and so that you don't have to wait for the latency. That's a kind of it's better for when you're in the episode. This is all a kind of a trial. I'm videoing it, but
Gotcha.
I'd probably delete this one.
You can slice out this chunk where I'm finding out how to watch the stream.
Well, you can. We could edit it, but it's like there's so many things in the episodes where things have gone wrong. So, like, it's all, But this is my OBS thing. I've got a big screen of me, and then I've got my kind of Emacs and stuff. I can kind of increase the font, and then we've got this kind of overhead camera, so I can kind of do a picture of, and
Yeah, the overhead camera is quite cute because it's slightly jerky and it almost makes it look like it's stop motion animation.
Right, yeah. Well, it's kind of useful sometimes to explain stuff. It's good to have just to hand, and my whiteboard isn't obviously very visible on the stream. So anyway.
No, I think it's a good system.
Yeah, and I've got a mic on as well, and so as long as these batteries last, then I have bought some new ones. But back to here we are. So I just did a little video to explain while I was updating this README. I kind of site is live, but I guess there is the news to say that card is now live. And I guess I need to explain, and I mean, you know this already, but I just need to kind of explain to the huge audience out there that what we're looking at here is Crux. Oh, hang on, I've got to put my... So we've got the Crux database at the bottom, and then we have site here, which is another repo, and then we have card here, which is... This is, I guess you could call this an app. And then there's HTTP, which is, so site is an HTTP resource server. And so card is an app that stores its cards inside site, which go into Crux. So Crux provides kind of the persistence, which down at the bottom is provided by RocksDB. But can be, any number of other things like S3, RDS, and Postgres, and so on, and Kafka for the And Crux provides data log query, bitemporality, lots of indices that make magic happen. So yeah, that's really the architecture diagram, which you know already, Steve. I'm just pointing it out for the future prosperity. So how are you? Are you still on?
I'm good. Sorry, I'm switching windows here because I'm advertising your Twitch stream to a few different people.
I'll see when they turn up.
Yeah, yeah, I'm good. I think that this is actually quite a so from an open source perspective, I actually think that this is kind of this is an interesting way to get people involved in this because card is very directly applicable to real business processes and it's very tangible and people can start contributing quite easily with ClojureScript. And Site is a little bit more technical and a little bit more web oriented, API oriented. And then as people get comfortable with Crux, then they can start digging into like the real meat of the database if they want. But it's a sort of progressive way for people to get involved with the project and then take any one of the pieces that they're interested in. I mean, if somebody only wanted to be a card user, that would still be exciting for the stack, I think. So I'm quite curious to see where this goes in terms of people's involvement. If we can get people to join and hang out. Hey, Govind, we were just talking about you.
Hey, can you hear me?
Hey.
Hey, Govind.
So I was just saying to Malcolm that the sort of 3-layer stack of card, site, and Crux is kind of interesting from an open source contribution perspective. And so this whole episode is Malcolm introducing the stack and introducing the code, I think, to some degree, and how to get started with site and card.
Yeah, I mean, I just did that and I've recorded it and it's on the stream, but I'm going to upload the shorter video to YouTube after this episode. But we were just going to have I think, general chat, really. I think Alex has joined us, so he's on the Discord. So, we it's really just a... Hi, Alex. Aren't you're having a good holiday? Or did you already have it?
This is what my holiday tends to involve.
Your holiday is catching up with my Twitch streams.
Pretty much.
Well, that's good. I liked Stephen. Just by the way, I like this idea that you kind of card is easier to get kind of your mind around, and it's more kind of pertinent to your daily stuff. And then as you get into card, you kind of look underneath the cover and you sort of see site underneath, and it's like the underworld. And then you realize you keep getting sucked into more and more technical stuff, and you discover Crux is underneath that, and then you get into Crux and all that kind of cool stuff around there, and it gets more and more technical as you go down. But then that's that kind of nice open source free software graduation that it's inviting. There's no barriers, there's no proprietary walls in place, and if you want to spend more time digging into the details, you're sort of that kind of graduation is available to you.
Yeah, I quite like the idea that that you sort of have these 2 layers of access to Crux itself, because I think we actually had the Los Angeles Clojure users group last night was going through Jeremy's Learn Crux data log tutorial.
Right.
And I think that starting from 0 to data log or 0 to Crux can be quite daunting to some people, even Clojure developers sometimes. And I think that the vision for site is probably quite a bit more accessible, where people are already comfortable with Swagger and defining APIs and the sort of smaller surface area to building web services and getting something up and running than is maybe required by Crux. I think that once people actually install Crux and start playing with it, they realize that it's actually quite simple. But initially, it can feel quite overwhelming. So many modules and new query language to learn and all of these things. So I hope that site makes things a little more accessible for people that way.
Yeah, I think I think at the same time, Crux. I think it was Jacob O'Brien says it's the the database that sparks joy, which I think is a great endorsement. But obviously, it's it does have that once you get into it, but it's that initial barrier where you've got quite a lot to do because it's a library, and so first you have to install it, and you have to do quite a lot of things before you get that feeling. If you're used to something like Datomic, then you've probably already done most of the learning that you need to do. So that's when you're switching from Datomic to Crux, and it's quite easy. But for people who haven't done that, it could be a bit of a barrier to entry. So yeah, I was Alex, are you still on? I was having a look at Storyboard today. I don't know if have you actually had a chance to test drive it or play around with it?
Yeah, I mean, only in a small way. I think it will really shine on bigger projects. I think if you're sort of doing a one person project or a side project or something small, it adds a lot of friction that you don't necessarily benefit from. But as soon as you start getting like multiple people, especially if you have designers or just front end people and then other people who maybe aren't so into the front end, it helps a lot there because it really like forces you to separate your logic from your views. It allows you to test your views outside of your logic. And yeah, so testing is a big area where I think it would be good. They have this chromatic SAS thing as well, which is sort of, I guess, built by the same people, but it does this clever thing where as you push your new UIs, it will give you like these screenshots of changes, and you can sort of go through and go, yeah, that's fine, yeah, that's fine. Oh, whoops, that looks like a bit of an error. And after having worked on like some pretty complicated front ends, it is very easy for a CSS change or like a component change to have an unintended effect somewhere else. Even if you follow all the good patterns and whatnot, it's still like surprisingly easy, especially with different devices and mobile and dark mode and all these different themes. Having automated testing is definitely like a really good thing to catch that. But automated testing historically on the front end has been very difficult and cumbersome to set up, and you get a lot of false negatives and false positives, whatever. So I think it has a lot of benefits, especially for bigger projects, but there is definitely some friction to setting it up.
Well, I mean, what excites me about component development is that the vision of card is to have all kinds of different renderings and views on the same data in the database. So this idea that a card can also be a time range, some cards can be a time range, and then you can project that onto a calendar or onto a graph or a chart or something, and so the ability to create visual components easily and then tie them to some adapt them, as it were, to a set of cards and say, please display me a histogram of this set of cards. So because we're really talking about there's a lot of apps out there that will do unstructured data. I call it unstructured data, kind of textual data, and where and note-taking apps and their own research apps and those things. But I think the area that's underserved by these kind of very flexible tools is the world of business apps, where you do have structured data, where you have real fields, and more like a kind of patient record, or you know, an employee form, or some kind of things that actually you can say, well, it has to have this and it has to have this set of fields. So, you know, that was my thought of storyboard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much you've used Notion, but they kind of have this idea of you have a table and you can have these different views of this table. So you can view it as just a table, or you can view it as a Kanban, or you can view it as a calendar, or they have all these like different sort of widgets, and it's the same data. It's just a list of fields, and you just define like a column, and you can say it has a type, it's a number, it's a date, it's whatever, and then you put values in there. But then you can display it as your Kanban, and you can use it for project management. And it, under the hood, I'm assuming they have some, you know, way of maintaining order and some like hidden metadata things on top of the, you know, metadata that you're putting into this table. And I think that's like a really interesting thing. And I think it would be really interesting if that was more open, and you had your cards or whatever, but you could use, you know, these Kanban views and whatever, but then you could write your own view, and you could say, I'm doing this app where it's a patient record system or whatever, and I need my cards to be viewed in this way with, you know, these headings are important. And I think that's quite a difficult thing to do, because obviously you get into a battle or a balance between super flexible but quite a lot of work, and then a lot done for you but not a lot of flexibility. So
I'm very interested in that. Sorry,
go on.
I'm particularly interested in this area of power users developing their own solutions, and that used to be a much more common thing. I don't know whether, you know, there were more apps around, I guess, when I was starting my career. There were, I think this is what the market of Visual Basic was targeted at, but users had up to then use these things like Fox Pro and FileMaker, and Lotus Notes was the big one, and Excel. Today people have written things which we call today end user developed applications, or big IT calls them kind of, these are these users doing these kind of, they're, you know, fending for themselves. This will never do. But it feels to me that today we've broken everything very much into two camps. There's the users in one camp, there's the developers in another camp. And whilst as a developer, that's quite nice to know that, you know, that you're much in demand. I feel that in the long-term future, it becomes unsustainable to require specialists to keep all these applications going, partly because there's lots of application software to maintain, and developers are humans, and humans will eventually kind of expire. So it strikes me anyway, I may think a bit heretical about this, but the mode of software development of requiring lots and lots of developers to do every single tiny change, every little change that has to be done to an application suite has to be done by developers, and there isn't really any scope for users to do anything, right? And so users are disempowered from the process. Developers might use agile methodologies to say, let's engage with the user community and get them into focus groups and get them to the requirements and so on, but that engagement is very kind of impotent, it's passive. They're not able to actually make the changes. Partly that's because of the kind of inflexibility of business software. So that's my kind of rant of the month, and something I see the industry is going into making developers more and more productive and making them, you know, with agility. But it's actually, when people say the word agile, what they mean is the agility of the developers and the team to make, you know, to take on more requirements, to shift their plans around, to work on different features, to prioritize. But it's not a characteristic of the software that they end up delivering, which is often allowed to be very brittle and doesn't have to last, and it doesn't have to flex, because in 5 minutes time there'll be another version of that software coming down the pipe. So I mean, you've heard me rant about this, Alex, as well, and I know you've got a different take on it. But I feel that the power of users to help themselves has been shown in, you know, in certain areas like Excel and some of these older things where people have run their entire businesses on software they've created themselves. That used to be quite a common thing to hear about, and now people are almost tied into SaaS products, and you know, they don't have the ability to, you know, they have some ability to do some kind of integration and glue between these SaaS products and things like Zapier and stuff, but it's a sort of outside-in integration.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. I think it is like an important thing that people can do things for themselves. A lot of the time, I see in the projects that we do, even simple things like making a word capital letters or changing a typo or something requires like a whole bunch of knowledge that it really shouldn't do in an ideal world to change. And the people who run these businesses are not silly. They're like very intelligent people, and the fact that they are not able to change a typo in their own like business software is definitely a pretty interesting thing. And I think there are answers to this that people have made, you know, like Airtable and Glitch, and I don't know there's like quite a few of these SaaS things that the low code, no code sort of industry that seems to have popped up, and they claim that, you know, you don't need to know anything about programming. You can just drag and drop things, and you can make your own website, and you can cut out the techies. And I don't think that they have really like got there. I mean, obviously they haven't, because otherwise we wouldn't have a job. But there are real like issues with those things. I'm not even sure that the fact that they're SaaS products and you're sort of locked in is the biggest issue. I think that they're just not capable of producing the same output that is necessary for a lot of products. Like if someone wanted to make, you know, a stock trading app that did what Excel did, but, you know, faster and with more customizability, I don't think there are any other options other than to, you know, code it yourself. I don't think you can use Airtable or Excel or whatever to go any further than they already are. I think there are limitations to those easy things. So I guess the solution is to just allow easier interoperability between the easy way of doing things and the technical way of doing things, and say we're going to build the easy way where it makes sense, but sometimes we'll need performance and we'll need customizability, and then we'll have to add this complicated stuff on, and split it up into like these different sections. And I guess that's kind of like what Card is doing in a way. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, I think Stephen brought in this connection with the right to repair, and I was reminded by your example of you were saying it'd be great if you brought in the developers when you needed the technical skill and you needed a specialist job. Just in the case where you have a car, it's a bad example today because anything that goes wrong with your car, you have to take it to the garage, which is a kind of, I suppose, is a good analogy of how development has gone. But I don't want to say in the old days, but it was true in the 80s that you could pretty much fix much of the things that went wrong with your car. You'd have to get it officially serviced and MOT'd, and that was a way of the MOT stands for it's the Ministry of Transport test that happens in the UK to make sure that your vehicle is roadworthy. But the assumption is that you can change your tyre if you want to get somebody else to do it. You can pay them, or you're welcome to do it. You could change the gearbox, clutch. You could fix all sorts of things. Nowadays, if it goes wrong, it's usually, in the case of our car, it'll be a software upgrade required, and and you're entirely there's no expectation that a user will fix their own car. So I think that I think the right to repair movement, which is what Stephen made that connection. I can't remember the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, but he said this movement and that is a little bit low code and no code. Although we've had lots of it, there's lots of corpses on that kind of for the last as long as I've been programming, there have been approaches to make coding easy for the user, and so you wouldn't need coders. But I've seen many of those fail. But there does seem to be a real wave now. You mentioned Glitch and Airtable and Notion and lots of things like that, and Dark. I think there's lots of things where they're trying to make development easy, which is good. But I think this could be the sometimes these waves come, but the timing is wrong. But maybe the tools and the technologies are such that it could be possible today. But no, that's definitely the hope I have, that we can roll things back a little bit and make software, democratize it a bit more, and allow people to help themselves and repair their own systems.
I was oh, sorry, you go ahead, Stephen.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Alex.
No, I was just going to say I was having this exact same conversation with Dominic about the car analogy and right to repair. And I mean, it definitely is harder to repair cars. Like, I used to work in a garage repairing cars when in like the late 2000s. So before, I think it was more or less before electronics were really like hard baked into how cars worked. The sort of cars that we would see were from the 90s and early 2000s, and you'd have electronics in there, but they wouldn't be connected to how the car actually worked. It would be like the radio would go, or
Right.
the lights or the indicators or whatever. If the electronics went, the engine would still work, the steering would still steer, the pedals would still make the car go and stop. But then there was like this changing point where they, instead of the pedal pressing a lever that made more fuel go into the engine, it pressed an electronic sensor, and then some computer would decide how much fuel to put into the engine. And there was this like big switchover point where everything became like that. And even the steering nowadays is, you're not turning the wheels, you're turning a motor with a sensor which is telling the computer to turn the wheels. And it does make a lot harder to repair, because the skill and the knowledge you need to have just jumps up massively. But I think, like, to play devil's advocate there, you could say 100 years ago, to repair my calculator would be easy because it's bricks or an abacus or something, and if it goes wrong, I know that I just need to get a new abacus rod and put my beads on it better or something. And then nowadays, obviously, no one has a chance of repairing a calculator because they're silicon and no one has the tools or knowledge. But that's not to say that there's like all disadvantages with that, because calculators are much more efficient and much better than abacuses in pretty much every way, other than the ability to repair. So I don't think that this right to repair thing is necessarily like always as bad as it sometimes sounds. I will definitely concede that some companies make it difficult on purpose, because especially car companies definitely do this, where they don't give they have proprietary connectors and they have proprietary software, and they don't give anyone access to it because they want people to go to them specifically, and they don't want these third parties popping up. And that is a problem. But it is just the nature of improvement in technology that as things get more complicated, they will get harder to repair by the people who use it. And I don't know if there's much you can do about that apart from going back into old-fashioned technology, which no one wants to do.
Yeah, interesting. Stephen, what was your...
Yeah, I was going to make the point that I think the car analogy is actually useful in another way, which is that there's often this confusion about giving power to the user and this sort of absolutism, right? Where like, oh, okay, we need to give the user a programming interface, and then they need to be able to control absolutely everything. And I can think of two examples, one in the world of automotive computation and one in the world of regular computation, like a standard desktop computer. The first being that we have a friend, Arun, who works on all these sorts of audio video things in Linux. That's kind of been his whole career. And when he works in the automotive space, which he does on occasion, he always likes to highlight this fact that yes, there is a computer in the car, the computer that controls the stereo and the computer that controls how much fuel is being injected or how much brake is being applied are totally unrelated. There's a firewall in between them essentially, and one can't touch the other. You can send kind of abstract messages over the wall. You can say, well, this event is happening. But so as the car speeds up, it can notify the stereo to, hey, get a little louder because the engine is going to be getting louder now. But they can't control one another directly.
Right.
And I think that there's a similar space in desktop computing, actually, where my brother was saying the other day, he was playing with mining cryptocurrencies a few months ago. I think almost everyone was who had a fancy video card. And I asked him, oh, well, aren't you concerned about melting your graphics card if it's just grinding away? And he said, oh, no, the software that I've installed has control over the voltage in the video card. And I think that that's sort of the equivalent of computation that controls the engine, right? Is that, oh, okay, if you allow the software to control things like voltage and wattage going through your hardware, you really need to trust what's going in there, or you might melt some of your hardware along the way. And I think that if you tie this back into the world of business computing and things like card and site, that there can be this sort of division between the world of the programming interfaces that you give to, an accountant or a CEO, that you can say, well, okay, here's a simplified programming interface. The right to repair movement, if you want to call it that, or resurgence, because I think that actually computers started out that way. I think that it cross-cuts this, right? Where you can say, well, okay, it would be nice for people to be able to gain control, and it would be nice to know which world you're living in, but that you can live in both worlds. So that you can say, yes, I can control the stereo, and yes, actually, I can write the code that controls how much fuel is being injected into the car, but I need to know that I'm living in that world. It's not a smooth gradient where you just hand complete control over to any user and say, okay, Mr. CEO, change the data model and change like how the bytes are recorded on disk and everything. And then all of a sudden you have a world of, buffer overflows and weird problems that you would never expect from giving programming power to an end user. But at the same time, if that CEO learns to program, C or Clojure or whatever, they should be able to have that control. They should be able to take on that role, and I think that's the sort of crux of it's funny how often I stumble over that word now. Of the right to repair movement is just that you should be able to get there. And I thought it was quite funny. There was a Steve Wozniak little keynote, kind of last minute keynote that you had sent, Malcolm, maybe a month ago or so, where he actually says his favorite programming language is actually HyperTalk. And he says, oh, well, HyperTalk was such a great language. It did exactly what you said, and it was so reasonable. And I like to hear a message like that coming from someone like Steve Wozniak, who you know that in the early days of desktop computing, personal computing, was suggesting to end users, who was effectively an end user, solder the computer together yourself, right? Which that's the computational equivalent of get a new rod for your abacus and thread the beads yourself. For him to say, actually, you know what, there are two or maybe three separate worlds here. And the world that you want to expose people to first is a HyperTalk world. It's this sort of Duplo bricks simplified world of having control of your software. But if you want to go down to Lego, or if you want to go down to soldering things together yourself, you can, and you should be able to. I think that's the message. It's not necessarily that you want to hand all the control to the users straight out of the gate, and that there should be sort of one tool to rule them all.
Yeah, I'm reminded by, you talk about this ability that you can figure out how to learn how to do soldering iron and get, there shouldn't be a barrier apart from your own technical skill. And I think that's true for the Linux kernel in the sense that you can actually make changes to the Linux kernel. They won't necessarily get accepted, and you have to get it past, ultimately you have to get it accepted by Linus into his branch, otherwise it's not going to get released. So there is a whole set of checks and balances to stop you making, to review what you've done, which isn't the same as kind of going and changing your own car. You might not have that review structure, but it's interesting that you can go all the way to the very, very bottom, I suppose, with the Linux kernel as an individual. Whereas the right of repair for a phone, for example, is just, I guess people are frustrated that if your battery dies, to the extent that a person could open it up and change the battery, but they're not allowed to, or things like the debacle with Epson printer ink, where you're not allowed to refill your printer with ink because they've kind of got some sort of DRM on the print cartridges, and prevent, so they can carry on selling you more expensive ink. And some of us have seen how degraded some industries become and how anti-consumer they become in the name of profit. Realize there's no, this is just a process, and it's a tug of war, right? You can try and pull, you might just, I'm not fatalistic about you see some of these industries go into this complete, horrible, where the users are totally trapped. There's no competition. It's incredibly expensive, and we all know what it's, and so there's always a balance in society of trying to find the right balance between the freedom of individuals and the requirements of society to, and businesses. So I'm generally thinking the pendulum, it's really a pendulum thing. It's just you've got to try to influence the pendulum to swing a little, where you see there's an imbalance. And I think there is an imbalance in mobile phone repair, and there's an imbalance in business software. It doesn't mean to say there's an imbalance in automotive. I don't know. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Or
yeah, I think there probably is. I think just as phone companies will do whatever they can to try and get more money, which is I guess a lot of companies will do that, whether that be soldering the RAM onto computers, or making the battery tags with some DRM thing so you can't just get a third-party battery. And some of that they'll claim is for the good of the consumer, because if you could just put anything on there that gave power and it would still work, or with these third-party screens, then people would get sold bad ones, and it would look bad. My mum's phone screen broke, and she went in and got it repaired, and they put some dodgy third-party one, and the touchscreen never really worked properly afterwards. So I think there's definitely a point to companies saying you have to get our approved installers and our approved thing and whatever. But yeah, there's definitely a balance needed, because if you just let them do whatever,
there's uses and there's abuses, and when you look at it's all a game. Businesses are always going to be trying to find ways of improving profit, and as they should. That's like a football team is always trying to find ways of scoring a goal, and they could say, well, we're going to put 5 more people on the pitch, or we're going to put 3 strikers right up against the opponent's goal, and we're going to what have you. But the reason they can't do that is that there are rules to the game. There's an offside rule. You're only allowed 11 players on the pitch, blah blah blah. So they are constrained by the rules of the game, and business is the same. You have rules, and they're called regulations and laws, and they regulate what businesses can do. And what we're saying is that the regulations and the laws have failed often in technology, because regulations are quite slow to refine and technology moves ahead. So sometimes it's kind of up to us to try to balance things without the help, waiting for the regulators to catch up.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes the regulations do the right thing. And I think with this whole battle that's going on in the moment, the right to repair thing, like the thing with Apple, I think last year Apple announced that they're actually going to start opening up repairs to third-party companies. It's still not perfect because I think you have to apply and get approved by Apple, but maybe that's the same that Linux has it, right? You can write code and do it on your own if you want, but if you want it to be, properly integrated, then it has to be approved by the Linux people, and you're not just going to sneak stuff in, and there are good reasons for that. But yeah, the regulations moving a lot slower than the technology is definitely a problem that's caused a lot of trouble, and I don't really know what the solution is, because you can say like, oh, it's up to us to try and make technology that has our version of the good rules before the good rules are made, or that sort of thing. But that's quite difficult.
Yeah, well, be the change you want to see in the world, I guess. Write the software that expresses your values, and and I think one of my values is that I like to see I think individuals should have a little bit more control, power, or autonomy over their software. I've seen so many people in my career, users, who have been forced to use the most horrendous systems, internal systems that are written for the gargantuan organizations. Some of them are the most laborious and mundane and horrible things, and people are really trapped 8 hours a day at work. Many people's jobs are just in front of a PC, having to do business processes. We're very, very fortunate in our tools as programmers because, programmers tend to be able to make changes to their tools. That's the point. We're tool makers, and so we end up with really good tools. But that's not the same for many people on the planet who have horrible software. I guess that they're not. It's not killing them, but it's definitely something I've experienced as a pain.
Yeah, well, my friend's a doctor, and he says, like, from what he said, it sounds like sometimes the systems they have to deal with actually do cause harm to patients.
You're quite right. Yeah, I shouldn't have said it's not killing people. In fact, poor software. I mean, don't get me started on hospital systems, but yeah.
Yeah, but I think that one is, and certain like very regulated businesses have the problem where there's just a lot of politics involved, and to even write software, it's not even a case of you have to be a developer. It's you have to be a approved developer and go through this very painful process to get all of these boxes ticked so that you can even begin. And the only people who actually want to go through that tend to not be the people who are good at writing software. And even if they are, then there's just so many rules and procedures to go through that the whole thing just gets watered down a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that particular case. So my brother actually works in. He works for our. So I live in Canada, and I mean, you guys know that, but maybe someone who listens to this in the future doesn't. So in our province, we have an agency called eHealth, which so Canada has universal healthcare, and then eHealth is sort of the corporation responsible for digital tools around the healthcare system. And it's not the case that it's all terrible, but there's certainly a lot of legacy there. And it seems to be sort of the worst of all worlds on all three corners of this triangle. So if you think about the right to repair and the option for DIY, it's not as though the doctor's offices or clinics are able to replace the software that they are finding frustrating or in some cases even dangerous. And then the second corner of the triangle is this aspect of regulation where in some cases regulation can really help you. You can say, oh, okay, you abide by the regulation to make sure that things are safe and to make sure that things meet a certain quality standard. And then there's a sort of third corner to this triangle, which is what Malcolm was saying about you be the change you want to be, you design the software that you would want to use, and it doesn't necessarily need to be hemmed in by regulation. It just needs to be the case that people have an appreciation for high quality design, beautiful things, useful things, this kind of unification of form and function. And they all sort of feed off of one another. So if you have a closed system backed by poor regulations or old, outdated regulations, like this thing needs to talk to, fax numbers, which is actually a real thing in the Canadian healthcare system, that you wind up with poor design, and you can start to pick apart any one of these three corners of the triangle. You can say, well, okay, as a software developer, maybe my brother, he can say, well, I'm hemmed in by the regulations, and I'm hemmed in by the fact that my users have no right to repair, but I can try to design the software so that it's better for them. Or if you actually have some measure of control, if some of those systems happen to be, free or open source software, then the people out in the field can start contributing back, and they can start to improve. And the doctors themselves, could potentially push against the regulation. They could say, you know what, it's silly in 2021 to be forcing us to send faxes around as a form of messaging. Like, please change this regulation, regardless of whether the other two corners are resolved. But I do think that's the far end of the spectrum, right? Like these sorts of big corporate spaces where you have these very gray 1997 Oracle Forms style user interfaces that are completely locked into one software system, and they're horrible to use and everything else. That's a good that's a good anti-goal, right? To move away from that and to move toward these other sorts of software systems that I think we've seen success in each corner. So I would say that a lot of the open source world has proved the repair corner in this, that it's shown that it works, right? Linux has shown, Apache has shown that open source works. And you've more often than not, seen the design corner kind of captured by closed systems. So people tend to point at Apple, but even the software that we're using right now, right, we're on Discord and Twitch. They're both really nice systems, but they're both closed. And I think people have formed this sort of association where open systems can't also be beautiful. And I think that's not true. The things are, these two qualities will be relative. The economics of these systems, that they tend to be a little more beautiful or a little more nicely designed when they're closed historically, but that no longer needs to be the case.
Hey Steve, I'm going to just interrupt you on a kind of beautiful software point, because you can still see the screen, right? And I know this is not going to impress Alex, because Alex has been building for, but anyway, this is what I suppose we can call this episode 12, and this episode is called Jeremy Fixes the Bug. So now we have these paragraphs, although they are essentially just paragraphs as a metadata, but we've added a little drag handle, so we can drag these paragraphs around. We can't do it in a nested fashion yet, but that's a big win for us, because we can make something this was not working yesterday, so I wanted to show the audience, if there is anyone, because we've spent a couple of episodes trying to get this working. But that's essentially, that's the idea, that anything can be now. Okay, done that, and then anything can renew
something. I was watching an episode the other day, and you were talking about doing your Kanban view and
Yeah, well, we
how
still
you
have that here,
and
but we just felt that we were building two separate systems, and we felt, in fact, that. Oh, sorry
yeah,
to
but
cut
I
the
mean,
question.
like
Carry on,
you
Alex.
were
Sorry.
talking about how you were talking about how you were wanted a button on the card view, and you press that, and then it becomes a Kanban card or something, and you were talking as if it was two different systems, and
Right.
there's the Kanban system and the card system, and you can move between them by like pressing a button, and the card becomes a Kanban. But why not do like the Notion approach where there's only one thing, there's only one card, there's only one like map, and in that map you just have a load of metadata, and you just have different views, and maybe in some views you wouldn't use all the metadata, like the ordering or the priority or whatever you call that state. You
That's
just
it.
don't use
Yeah.
it in the card view.
I think we've
But
got to
then
that
you just have
realization.
another.
It's sorry, Alex. The latency is really hard to have a kind of like a back and forth, but I think you're quite right.
Yeah, it's weird that there is latency because I don't think there was before. Maybe it's my internet. I don't
Are you
think so.
talking over Discord? You're on Discord, aren't you? So that should.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a bit. But the idea was You're right. I mean, in Notion, you have this ability of there is this idea, at least I've read it in a blog, that you can turn a paragraph into a heading or so at the low level, they have this idea of explicit or extent, extent, I can't remember the name of it now. Extrinsic typing. But the idea is you're quite right that we were feeling that the only difference between a top-down drag-drop thing and a left-to-right drag-drop thing is the direction. I mean, it's just one is left to right and one's top. And if you have the ability to drag-drop, then it's just the flex direction that you're really talking about. So, I mean, this has a single container that has the paragraphs in it, but it could have a container of containers. It could have a column, and in fact, we had that idea already that you have a section container. So you might have for example, I had lots of thoughts on Sunday. I didn't show Steve this, but this was kind of lots of ideas on kind of Sunday morning, and it would be nice to say, well, this paragraph is far too big and it's got so many different things going on. Promote that into its own card, but keep it in this card, so that becomes a section of this document, and then recursively you build documents like this. But if you have that recursion, you then have, a Kanban is 2 levels, right? If you have the ability to support n levels, then you can do Kanbans. That's like right now we can move this, thanks to Jeremy, this actually works, and we can move things around. Anyway, that was.
Yeah, you should like have a bit of a dive into Notion's like API. Like they do have a good blog post on it. But basically it is quite similar to what you're doing, but their way of thinking about it, I think, makes a lot of sense, which is that everything is a block, and a block can either be a paragraph in a text document, or it could be a card in a Kanban, or it could be a item in a to-do list, or it could be a page of itself, and it's just a map. And in that map, you just have these core attributes. So you have the type, which is either text, or it's a heading, or it's a to-do list, or it's a table, or whatever. And then certain types will have certain expected attributes, like a table will have some children or some rows and columns as expected attributes, and a page will have stuff in it. But you can go to Notion / an ID, and it will render it as a page. And you can go to whatever /ID, and it will render it as something else. So that ID, obviously they have it as an item in their database, and it's just an entity, and that's all it is. And you never have multiple things. So when you turn a heading into a paragraph, it's not changing the database in any way other than changing the type attribute on that block to be from heading to paragraph. And there will be some things, I guess, where it has to have other metadata, like a to-do list needs a done or a in progress state, and the bits on the Kanban, you'll need like the column that it's in. It will be, Kanban state, and you'll have that extra metadata thing. But that's all that's changing. It's not becoming a new attribute. It's not getting added as a new entity or anything. There's only like one field of the item that you're on that changes, and that is really, really useful for a lot of reasons. And especially, and it just makes it really extensible. Like a lot of people have used the Notion API to make websites and apps that I guess Notion never even thought they would use it for. And that's especially like telling because Notion's API is private and has no documentation. But even despite that, people have figured it out and gone through that hurdle to make stuff just because.
Yeah, I'm a little bit. Yeah, Stephen, sorry. There's a lot of latency over to Canada today. Stephen?
Hey, sorry, I think my internet just had a bit of a hiccup there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Were you asking me something?
Oh no, I thought you had interjected. It's one of these kind of latency issues. We'll have to fix it. And I think I had my audio up too high, my speaker up too high. So I think there could be quite a lot of echo on this episode. But I'm going to have to, try and fix up OBS or maybe have an earplug or something. But I was about to say to Alex that there is a sort of like I've looked at some of the Notion videos, and there's a little bit of a thing when you go. Obviously, this idea that everything is a map is something that we've got in Crux, and there's sometimes if you get too, you begin to copy another system, it can blind you to certain avenues. So you begin to focus a little bit like, oh, this is what a rock band has to have a bassist and a guitarist and a drummer, and and without meaning to, you begin to define the problem domain as to what another product does. And I know that if I kind of went deep into Notion, I know they've talked to Ted Nelson or done some videos on that, so they're very much in the same kind of space that we are, trying to, bring some of the ideas of the past and all the kind of stuff we were talking about in the XT20 planning stages and things. So I am a little bit reluctant to go throw myself into figuring out how Notion works and recreate it just for that reason. And it's a well-known thing that people do. So I'm just trying to prevent that from happening. But if we end up with card being very similar and almost the same product, then at least it will show that product had been discovered rather than invented. I find it's a bit difficult to articulate, but I've just that you're falling into the trap of letting another product define your horizon entirely. But not to say it hasn't got some fantastic ideas in it, and particularly the idea of everything being able to build business apps, which is what we want to enable people to be able to do in a very natural way. And I think the main criticism of Notion is that it's closed and the API is private and what have you. That is not a system that people are going to build on and have those apps run in 50 years' time. Notion will either run out of money or they'll get acquired by something, to pay off their investors, and that thing will become cement and people will be trapped into it. So, we've seen that happened a lot, and maybe, by some miracle, it will carry on, and open up and become open source or whatever. But you can't bet your business on that happening.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the biggest problem with Notion. But I think it's interesting that there is no alternative that has a public API. Like, there are a lot of players in this space, like open source and closed source. There's probably more competition in this than there is in like video chat, which seems pretty ridiculous given how popular video chat is. But looking at all the different things like Rome Research and Athens Research and Obsidian and TiddlyWiki and all of these different products, none of them have a public API that's as good as Notion's private API based on some open source. Like there's a lot of open source wrappers around Notion's private API that people have made. Like there's one in Python and one in Go and one in JavaScript, and these are all like regularly updated every time Notion changes something. They change their thing, and my like little test website that has a blog that's powered directly from Notion that I set up last year still works despite multiple changes from Notion's like API, because it's not a public API. And that's interesting. Like as soon as there is something that has a public API that does what Notion does, I would actually switch to it if it was more open and
I mean, there needs to be a word for this. A Minecraft. I think it's the Minecraft effect, where people are desperate. The Minecraft is open enough, in that you can reverse engineer its Javadoc and things like that, and you can create some cool, amazing plugins. And people have written servers like Bucket and Spigot and things like that. But because it isn't officially open, because it's sort of it is closed, but it's got a few kind of, I guess people have tunneled underneath it to get in. The experience is very unsatisfying ultimately. When you go back and you try and get your plugin working and you realize you can't because of some sort of, you're always battling. And if the reward and the goal is big enough, you get your Minecraft, you can, but then great. But that's not it just feels such a waste of everybody's kind of good intentions and efforts to, it is such a shame that Minecraft wasn't officially open source, and I realized that it's up to him, and he wouldn't have got his 14 gazillion or whatever if he had, but still there was a massive market for an open source, amongst kids, with the all of the programming tools that they have to actually produce an open source Minecraft that was popular with community and everything. And Microsoft have tried to turn it into an educational tool, but it's the Microsoft attitude to open source that they don't really want to open it up at all. It's a very sort of closed, walled garden. And I feel quite resentful about it, because my kids have absolutely loved Minecraft and it's been wonderful for them, but they are trapped in a garden.
Yeah, you had the Valve source engine that was back in my day. This is like before Minecraft, I guess. That was very popular, and it was a game engine that Valve did. I don't know if they open sourced it, but they definitely made a lot of tools that anyone could download, and they could make their own games and their own maps and their own like modifications to games like Counter-Strike and whatever that you would buy. And that did have like a big community around it. And I think probably that's what Roblox is doing today, although I'm not down enough with the kids.
Well, Roblox isn't free either. I mean, Roblox is a...
No, I know this. I don't think this was free. I mean, it was definitely before subscriptions or anything, but it was open enough that people could easily make their own things and have like creativity. And I don't know what else you would want from it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in my world, free means freedom. Doesn't mean, there's no other definition for the word free. It's not about no subscription or whatever, or free as in beer. That just is an unfortunate other definition of free.
I think this was free as in freedom. It just wasn't free as in beer, because if you made a game with this source engine thing, that was yours and you could publish it and never go away, even if Valve went out of business.
Yeah.
But I guess you just didn't have like full access to all the code that went underneath it, but then you didn't really need to because, yeah, I mean, there's got to be a way for companies to make money because otherwise, you know, there's probably a whole bunch of open source projects that were very well intentioned that went under because they just didn't have funding, and there's ones that got lucky, like, or you know, maybe got lucky is the wrong word, but like Blender, I think is a good example of an open source project that started off, you know, being pretty good and people would use it even though there were a lot of quirks and it was pretty ugly. But then some really big companies were like, actually, if we invest in this, we'd be in a much better place than if we kept on with the closed source proprietary things that we have at the moment that we have no control over. And then, you know, obviously nowadays Blender is one of the industry leaders in its field and it's still open source because it's had all these millions of dollars in sponsored features and that sort of thing. So I hope that's the way that things will go in the future, and like GitHub sponsors and all this sort of thing I think are really good incentives for open source.
But financial backbone.
Yeah,
things grow and they die, the plants grow and they die. Once you need to establish a root system and get it, you know, and that's what an open source product needs, a number of contributors, such that if one company behind it goes under, as you say, that doesn't mean the end of that project. In many cases it does, because the project hasn't left the nest. But if if Datomic, for example, was free and Cognitect went out of business, that would be unfortunate for Cognitect, but it wouldn't be a problem for the community, because somebody else, if the product was important enough to people, they would then take it on and maybe fork it, or maybe, and then if you did fork it, you'd have maybe some competition. But there's so much open source there which is kind of tied to one individual or one company, and that is very vulnerable to financial regulation.
I think like in that example, or I guess if something like Datomic comes around and you decide to use it for your business, you should decide based on what it is now. And then if it does go out of business the next day or in a year or whatever, you can still use that thing because you have the thing downloaded, you've got the software. You just can't fix any of the bugs that are existing in it. But you've already decided that the way it is now is fine and it works for my business use case. Maybe in the future, it stops being relevant because other things have caught up and then you move. But I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing in the world. What I do think is bad is if you have these models where you can only use the product as long as the company stays alive, because it's fully reliant on them being alive and having servers. So like Notion, if Notion suddenly went out of business, you would lose all the links that you had to your documents.
Or even like Western Digital have got some servers that went down and everybody lost data on their hard drives. I mean, it's not funny if you had one of those drives, you lose all your data because somebody's mothership has gone down.
That wasn't in, like, I think that my granddad had a Western Digital thing, so he lost his data, but that was because it was a hack. Their cloud drives or whatever had a vulnerability where you could wipe them remotely and someone found it out. That could happen regardless of anything.
Well,
but
it's I was just pointing out on the screen here that this is because we've open source card today. I mean, it wasn't proprietary, it was just that we kind of hadn't got round to, but it is on GitHub now, and this is the public API. I mean, it is the openapi.eden file is the official API. So hey, there's not much of it at the moment, but as it evolves, it will remain public. But onwards and upwards. This is just episode 12. We'll carry on every week, every I think we're doing almost every day, and we'll carry on building. But I was interested in your point, your comment. I've added an issue here, Alex, and it was partly for your eyes, which was to try to capture the this idea of just using some JSX for the very basic things with got some Tailwind components, and they use this. You can go to Tailwind UI. You've seen this. You can get the copy of the JSX, and that gives you the React hooks kind of calls and things, and they plug in their headless UI component. So you just basically allow you to get your menus and things that are not super difficult, but like it would save us a lot of time. And I wondered if you'd had any. We've had this conversation about putting JSX into Shadow.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you tried it yet.
I spoke to Joanna, I think yesterday, about this.
Oh yeah,
'cause-
because I know Joanna's trying it for her thing.
Yeah, because I gave her a demo of what I did, and I gave her like the code that you need to make it work, because it's pretty simple to set up.
Right.
That Shadow does all the hard work for you. You just need to have another watcher process that looks at your JSX files and then compiles them into ECMAScript or whatever it is that Shadow recognizes.
Yeah.
So you import from gen/header.js, and that is generated from your source/header.jsx or whatever. And it works pretty well. But yeah, I was saying like the only major problems are if there's ever a problem in a JSX component, the errors can be pretty bad because you're getting the errors from the compiled ECMAScript thing.
Okay.
Which can be like pretty difficult to read. It's kind of like debugging in advanced compilation mode. Like it's not that bad, but it can be tricky. And the other thing is that you have to convert all of your props to JS objects. I mean, Reagent will do that for you, but that can lead to some interesting things happening too. But overall, I do think it's like worth exploring more. And yeah, especially like you're saying with these headless components where they have some hooks that just do some local state thing.
Yeah, that's all it is. And they've got working code, and it's amazing how much. I don't want to get into a debate about Tailwind or whatever, but it's amazing for somebody who's not a designer being able to. It's like the Stack Overflow programming nirvana. You just search for something, checkbox thing that does this. You find somebody who's done it, and you copy and paste it, and off you go. It encourages this kind of commons of lots and lots of HTML components, because the style is all what you see is what you get, I guess, because it's all encoded into the HTML rather than using classes and style sheets that are proprietary or at least different for every project. So it's more reliable that you can copy and paste a component in. Of course, you don't get the flexibility you do with CSS classes, but it's good enough. It's like that kind of thing when everything was Bootstrap. You could copy and paste.
Yeah, it does. I really didn't like it when I first saw it, and it's definitely grown on me more and more. And I've tried to use it on all my little hobby projects. But the biggest thing I think is one of like the reasons I think Reframe is good. And I have definitely gone off Reframe in general, but one of the reasons it's good is that it gives you this sort of pattern to work from. And even if you're not familiar with it, you're kind of forced or strongly encouraged to work within this pattern of dispatching events and then subscribing to state and keeping the state and events out of your view functions. And Tailwind strongly encourages you to have very good separation of your components so that you don't have duplication. Right. Because one of the big problems with having like all these classes is you end up writing, text green, font bold, font weight, whatever, padding this on a bunch of different things every time you write a heading. And then if you want to change it, if you go on, actually, I want my headings to be slightly less bold, then you have to update it in a bunch of different places. But if you do what Tailwind wants you to do and you just make a new function called heading, and that's the only place where you have that class string, and then you just use that everywhere, and you end up with a lot less HTML, like hiccup, and a lot more components.
Right. This is a class composition thing where you just bring in all the utility classes under the class heading, and then your you're free that will get compiled in. But it's not, it's like this idea of premature abstraction. Sometimes it's nice to repeat yourself and have all these utility classes because you can tweak each thing. And when you're kind of ready for that next step where you want to make things more aggressive.
Yeah, you don't do it prematurely. You write it as you are, and there's like some really good extensions for VS Code, which maybe I'll need to find, like an Emacs way of doing it, where you've written your thing in line in your HTML, and you're like, actually, I'm going to want this same thing in a few other places, and you can just right-click it and you go extract a component, and it puts it in a file in your components folder and imports it and does all that sort of thing. But you know when it's needed, and you don't do it up front. You do it when you're about to reuse it. So there are definitely traps you can fall into, and it's not like a perfect thing, and it doesn't force you to do it. So you can write bad code with Tailwind, but it does it suggests this pattern, which I think is a good pattern.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to wrap up now. I'll have a look at this recording to see if I can do anything about if there's a big echo on it, but whether we can use it.
There's been no echo from my side. So.
What was that? Okay, even when... Okay, well, that's...
I think Discord does a good job of cancelling it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but I'm using my own mic going in on my t-shirt going into OBS, so it will pick it up from my speaker. That was that. So I think in the OBS it will be echoey, but I put a bit of noise cancellation on OBS, but we'll see. All right, well that's fine. But okay, well have a good rest of your holiday. When are you back on Monday, or are you taking more time?
No, I'm taking 2 weeks. But
oh, great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to do some hobby projects and write a blog post or two, seeing as there's an incentive now.
Yeah, you're going to go outside?
Oh, I spent most of the day outside today.
Soaking up the
gardening. Yeah.
Cool. Good. Well, I think I need to get outside. I've been in the shed for another day, going crazy. But yeah, well, thanks very much, Alex. Thanks very much, Stephen, for coming on, and Govind as well. And let's wrap things up and talk to you tomorrow or next week. And have a nice evening.
Yeah. So